Okay, hi everyone. This is a problem from homework number 7. In fact, it's problem number 10. And when I copied it here, I had to cut off some of it, so I just added the information. It says, with a height of 64 inches, Marvin was the shortest president of a particular club in the past century. The club presidents of the past century have had a mean height of 68.7 inches with a standard deviation of 1.5 inches. Okay, so letter A asks, what is the positive difference between Marvin's height and the mean? How many standard deviations is that? Asked part B. And D is find the z-score. And then finally, is it unusual? Is Marvin's height unusual? Okay, so before I do anything, all of these problems I have said make a graph, make a picture, make a template, however you want to call it. And this is the template. We start with a number line. So everything here in yellow is what's going to go on every single problem. What we do now in pink pertains to this particular problem. So the first thing we have to do is, what is this number line going to represent? It's going to represent heights of club presidents. Okay, and I'm happy if you even just make sure we know heights, something that tells us what these numbers are. Okay, so this is what our x values are, okay? And our mean x, our mean height, goes right here at the center. It is 68.7. That is our mean. That's where x is equal to the mean of 68.7 inches. Okay? At the top, remember we have our z-values, our z-scores, and that's always the same. You've got 0, this is going to be 1 above, 1 below over here, and so on. And so this will always represent 1. This distance will be 1 standard deviation. From here to here, the next will be another. From here to here will be 2 standard deviations, and so on. However, what changes are the x values. What is 1 standard deviation for this particular problem? Well, 1 standard deviation for this particular problem is 1.5 inches. So we can figure out what is 1 standard deviation above the mean. Well, 68.7 plus that 1.5 is going to equal 68.7 plus 1.5, you can do that on your calculator, is going to equal 70.2 inches. So somebody who is 70.2, it's getting a little messy here, but 70.2 inches is 1 standard deviation above the mean. Okay, so this question is now specifically asking about Marvin. Okay, so I'm going to change my color for Marvin here. And the question is, what is the difference between Marvin's height and the mean? Okay, well, Marvin's height is 64 and the mean is 68.7. So what is the difference? Well, you know to do that. You can subtract 68.7 minus that 64 is going to equal 4.7 inches. So that's going to be part A, 4.7 inches. Okay. Graphically, what is that? Well, I'm not exactly sure where 60 is. We could go through the exercise of finding each of these values, but my guess is it's somewhere over here because 64 is pretty low, and each standard deviation is only 1.5. So I'm going to assume it's about here. Okay, so this distance, this is minus 1.5 inches, minus 1.5 inches, so on. These are each also 1 standard deviation change below, and you just keep going out, and then so this whole distance here will be 4.7 below. So we can also write that as negative. So here is Marvin at 64 inches tall. Okay, so we can see that he's clearly below the mean. The question is, how much? Okay, so how many standard deviations is this for part B? How many standard deviations? We know this is 4.7 inches here. So the question is, how many standard deviations is this? How many standard deviations are we below the mean? Okay, so when we know 4.7 inches and we know each standard deviation is 1.5 inches, so if we just divide that out, 4.7 divided by 1.5 is going to equal 3.13. So he's 3.13 standard deviations below the mean. And I would be perfectly fine if you use the negative. Just be careful because StatCrunch is picky that way, because then in Part C it specifically asks for what is the z-score. Well, the z-score is the number of standard deviations. It's just going to work out correctly in terms of positive and negative. So if we actually go through the formula, which we really just did, a z-score is our x value, and our x value is right here. It's Marvin. The x value we're trying to find. So now, instead of calling it this space, we're actually calling it, what is this, z-score. But it's, in essence, it's the same thing. So our x value of Marvin is 64, minus the mean, which is 68.7. And then we divide all of that by the standard deviation of 1.5. And it's basically what we just did over here, except because you've put it in the right order, we end up with negative 3.13. So z equals negative 3.13. Marvin is 3.13 standard deviations below the mean, below the mean. And then Part D just says, is this unusual? And if you remember from class that our magic usual to unusual numbers is that 5% rule, and that is right here because 95% lies between the two standard deviations. 95% is right in here. And since Marvin is way, 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 way outside of that at minus 3.13, then yes, he is unusually short. Yes, it is unusual. So go ahead and give your problem a try. Good luck.